The Army does not belong to any president. It is the army of the people for the people. It does not exist to protect power, and it must never, ever be used to intimidate or silence the very people it was created to defend.
As Donald Trump sat down to watch the military parade on Sunday, more than 1 million people in cities across the country showed up to march against both the parade and Donald Trump himself, including in Alexandria, Virginia, where the former acting vice chief of the National Guard denounced the president's use of the National Guard to help carry out his deportation policies. Joining us now, retired Major General of the U.S. National Guard. You just heard him there, Randy Manner, Doug Brinkley, Cornell Belcher, and David Drucker are still with us as well. All right, Major, I do want to get to you first. Talk to me about, General, talk to me about what you were trying to convey there at that speech when you were talking about what you're seeing on the streets in this country with the National Guard.
So I think it's very important to say that we were celebrating the Army's birthday, and it was also outstanding what those young soldiers did in that parade and all the civilians and contractors that did to make it a very successful and safe parade. So that's the first thing. At the same time, it's not something about how we celebrate a birthday in the Army. We usually have some cake. We recognize the eldest Army person, the youngest. We say a few speeches, and we tell some stories. And so it's one of those things where it's an overblown use of a demonstration of power that's not in keeping with the ethics of the United States Army. We are quiet professionals. Why I was compelled to speak out on that No King's Day Army birthday speech was to basically remind everybody that the Army is here as an extension of the American people, and it is not ever to be used against the American people. And all those young National Guardsmen and those young Marines that are in there that were not asked for by the mayor or by the governor, they're doing the best they can to stay busy and keep their mind in the game, while, of course, the Los Angeles police, which have been doing a wonderful job, continue to maintain order in that city.
Cornell, I asked this of Jacob last hour. I want to ask you as well. Why was this the tipping point to see more than 1 million Americans take to the streets?
Look, I think this is not disconnected from the conversation we were just having about division in America. And look, I do focus groups all the time, and Americans talk about sort of how divided we are, and especially women in these focus groups talk about how they fear for the future of the children if America keeps on this divisive pathway, and we keep growing more and more divided. They worry about the kind of future that their children will have. But also, Katie, I gotta say that last thing that we just did there, it struck me in a profound way, because I just remember back, and I'm a little older, but I remember when Reagan brought us all together after the Challenger disaster, right? And I remember how Bill Clinton brought us all together after the Oklahoma City bombing. I remember, Obama not so long ago, singing Amazing Grace after the shooting in South Carolina. Job of the president, number one job of the president is the safety of American people. And part of that is being, healer in chief, not just commander in chief. And we do need leadership at the very top that works hard at keeping all of this together, right? All of this union, which we know historically has been very hard to sort of keep together, it is always trying to come apart. And we need someone at the very top who, and historically, whether it be Republican or Democrat, we've seen in the presidency, Republicans and Democrats work hard at trying to hold this together. But as the general just talked about, so the ethics, this is different. We have someone at the top right now who I would argue is working harder and sees more political advantage in dividing Americans than bringing Americans together. And I think this is a reaction across the country with Americans who don't want to be divided, who don't want a police state, and don't like what they're seeing.
Yeah, and tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of the church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where 9 were killed. 10 years since that happened, and yet we're still seeing the same amount of violence. We're still seeing continued violence, I should say. motivated by hate in this country. David, the turnout on the streets, more than 1 million people, how significant do you think it is?
Well, it's hard to tell. Let's see if it's sustained, right? I mean, one of the things that's been different about Trump's second term compared to his first is voters sort of looked at his first election as a fluke. It really surprised a lot of people. And there were some immediate protests, and they were sustained. And Trump didn't even do, at least not right away, half the things that he's done so far via executive order, where Trump this time around is just much more normalized. And I mean that to voters, he seems just, oh, that's just who he is. And that's kind of just who our politicians are. And so they've been more accepting of him. Even politicians, even voters that don't necessarily like him all that much, they looked at the choices they had last year and they made their choices saying, I wish I might have had something different or something better. But hey, I guess this is it. And they're giving things a chance to work. Now, that's not true for everybody. As we well know, we can look at polling, we can look at these demonstrations from this past weekend. My point is to say that I think voters broadly could get to a tipping point with Trump where they've just had enough, and that could manifest in 2026 with the midterm elections or 2028 in electing a Democrat to succeed Donald Trump. But that I don't think that this term, in terms of voter resistance, is necessarily going to look like the first term did.
Yeah, Doug, I want your thoughts on that as well, because I think in the conversations I was having as these protests unfolded, I was overseas, but I was talking to folks, and they were saying they felt girded by seeing Americans on the street. They felt that they were finally seeing some pushback, made them feel better about the American democracy.
Well, yes. I mean, anytime you have a resistance or have show people protesting peacefully, it's always a great American moment. We grow up reading Henry David Thoreau and Civil Disobedience and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham City Jail, and protesting is important. We got to remember also, though, the first Trump term, you had the largest march in history, the Women's March on Washington, and it wasn't sustained. It was this extraordinary day. Every women pouring into Washington, and then that movement broke up. So the key is to get geared up for the fact that the biggest resistance of all is voting. Barack Obama's line, don't boo vote. The lack of enthusiasm in the last election, where Kamala Harris got 10 million less voters, than Biden on the Democratic side. That has to be figured out by the Democratic Party. They've got to use 2020 or 2026 as this watermark midterm election, because if one of the frustrations is when we talk about authoritarianism in America is that President Trump, there's a feeling that the Supreme Court's on his side. There's a feeling that he can do what he wants with the military, and he has Congress, Senate. If they lose Congress, the purse strings of the country, you're going to feel more balance out there. So I think protests are great as long as they're peaceful. And what was despicable was, I thought, President Trump allowing Senator Padilla to be thrown to the ground at a press conference in California, to have a U.S. senator handcuffed and treated like that. To me, that's a startling moment in American history that should be the lead on about everything that's happened in the last week.
Yeah, I got to say, it was a startling video. General, I want to get your last thoughts on just the military. I mean, we're talking about institutions in this country and the trust factor here. So many of our institutions, Americans don't trust them any longer, by and large. A big one, a big variable here, or an important part of this, is the military. And you've said that you're concerned about the way that Donald Trump is using the military, the National Guard in Los Angeles, could deteriorate that trust. What does it mean for Americans to have less trust in our own military?
One of the most important things that every leader in the military must do, and by the way, this is also true of political leaders, the best ones, every leader in the military has got to instill trust in all of his soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. They have to believe in each other. They have to believe in the leader. They have to believe that there is hope, and that together they are far more powerful and unite when they are united. That's the one thing that must continue is that the military must be viewed as apolitical, meaning not aligned with any particular party, and we must return to our roots, and the president must allow this to happen. We have to find a common ground for all of our leaders to be able to communicate that feeling of hope. And we might as well get behind the flag. And then, of course, in the second one, freedom of speech with accountability. And lastly, of course, treat others like you want to be treated. We are all Americans.